allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning. It's Wednesday, February 8th, 2017. It's 10 a.m. I'm going to, I'm going to read the public notice and then make a few comments before we begin. The public notice was on Wednesday, February 8th, 2017 at 10 a.m. in the Board of Commissioners hearing room, Courthouse Annex located at 94235 Moore Street, Gold Beach, Oregon, 97444. The Board of Commissioners will convene for a workshop. The topic will be discussion on a county administrator/manager. Other items or other matters may be discussed. The public is welcome to attend. I'm going to go back just briefly about 3 weeks because we have requirements as far as the notice to the public and providing this information to the public. And about 3 weeks ago, we had a marathon commissioner meeting. It went till after 5. Okay. And I requested a recess at that time before 5 o'clock so that I could meet the workshop deadline requirements. Matter of fact, we had a discussion, Commissioner Boyce and I, because you had not, afterwards you said, well, I missed the requirement for the notice. At that meeting, when I called for the recess just before 5, I was advised by county staff, commissioner office staff, that I had not met the deadline because the deadline for that workshop was 9 days, not 7 days notice. Okay. And I just ignored that. I went ahead during that recess and filed the notice for the workshop. The next day, I was again advised that I had not made the notice for the workshop. And I was provided a copy of the workshop policy. And I think it's important, I'll ask county council, although I'm working on a different revised one, but the county council, or he advised the direct commissioner staff to get you a copy because I was provided a copy and told I had not met the requirements. And the copy showed 9 days versus 7. I realized that was an older document, so I had to take my time after that notice or reminder, and I obtained the most current policy, county policy, which was 7 days, and emailed that information to the staff individual. I also updated county council on that. So now we fast forward just to the next workshop, the following workshop, and I went online this morning again, because I was home yesterday, and I tried to obtain which I thought I'd brought a copy with me, to obtain the memo from county council on this particular subject here on the administrator manager, and there's nothing on the county website. Clearly, this notice for this workshop did not meet the requirements of the current policy. Therefore, a memo on November 8th clarifying this of 2016 from county council, because we'd had so much abuse of going past the notice deadline and people putting things on. He wrote I guess it was a 10 or so page memo to administrative staff and departments on agendas and submittal deadlines, and identified the normal meeting agenda and also the workshop agenda. So the fact that this has not met this workshop notice, because the public cannot go online and even see the documents, the informative memo that we're talking about, and I thought it was quite informative, dated February 2nd, 2017 from county council. The board here has the discretion to waive the requirements of the time, submittal time, and have this workshop and discuss things that the public has not seen. They couldn't possibly have seen it unless they knew somebody who had access to a supplemental folder on the county website and provided them a copy. But for the most part, the public has not even seen this very informative memo, and yet we're going to be talking about this, or it's proposed that we're going to be talking about this today. So I put it back to the policy. The board can vote to accept a late submittal, or they cannot accept it, and the workshop can be rescheduled. So I'm very disappointed that, again, the experience that I encountered just the prior workshop, and then here do as I say, not as I do. So I put it back to the county council.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. So the submittals for this workshop were submitted pursuant to our policy. They were not provided to the Bach office at the publication deadline. And so they were put in supplemental, and then they were sent to the board. There was one public records request for supplemental material, which was sent out to members of the public. And then also copies of the material are printed and available to the public right now. And this is not typically an opportunity for a public hearing or public comment even. So the public will be informed if they're here and we go through these materials, and I'm prepared to. So if the board's going to consider, per policy, whether to accept this and proceed, that's information for the board's decision.
Correct.
Well, let me just say something. There will be no public comments here, right? Generally speaking.
Generally speaking,
okay,
yes.
and the reason I'm saying this is because they would have an opportunity to view the entire proceedings online if they,
That's correct also.
so desired.
Right, and also there's no decision to be made by the board today, and if the public, with the information they received today, they can come back at the next board meeting and give comment on these materials, because we're not proposing any board decision. This is information that the board's requested to be presented, and I'm prepared.
So
I'm prepared to.
To the board, is it acceptable?
It's acceptable to me.
Do we need to make a motion for a waiver as you outlined, Commissioner Huxley?
I think for the record, yes, I would request that.
I so move.
Second, please.
Okay, call for the question.
Aye.
Aye.
I vote no. So the majority of the board accepts the late submittal of
Comment.
information to this workshop. County Council, it's your memo, so you have the floor.
I want to make a quick comment,
Commissioner
if I
Boyce.
may. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for catching that. I'm not, I need clarified though where we are on whether it's 9 days or 7 days. I've never heard it.
It's been 7. It's documented.
That's what I
was
thought.
provided to the Board of Commissioner staff.
Thank you again. We're not likely to have this difficulty again, are we?
Oh, I think we will.
That was the reason for the memo.
Sure.
It had to come to a memo.
Okay.
Right, I think
Good work,
I
though.
actually think late submittals will happen. They happen actually every agenda, and at every agenda, the board at the beginning of each meeting looks at the supplemental package to see if they will add late submittals per the policy. So it's a built-in part of our meeting policy. So it's not out of the ordinary. In this case, it was me who submitted it late, which would have been late whether it was 9 or 7, but it is 7, and staff was wrong when they told Commissioner Huxley, the chair, that that it was 9 and that he had missed it. And if I'm not mistaken, even in that event, we administered it properly, and your submittals were considered on time, and
Because
that they
they
were
were
included.
on time.
Correct.
They were in
so
fact on time.
So there was a proper administration of the rules, notwithstanding the improper communication. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, so all that being said, I see some members of the public do have a printed out copy of the memorandum. And for those of you who don't, I'll be going through it in a fairly, hopefully easy to understand way. Before I do that, Mr. Chair, I have just 3 quick items that I would like to bring to the board's attention, and it with the board's permission, if I could. Is that all right? Consensus? Thank you.
Thank you.
So recently, I think at our last meeting, we appointed, and maybe it was even 2 meetings ago, we appointed Mary Rowe to the Coos Curry Housing Authority. And the order was signed and it was filed in due course with the county clerk. So it's an official document, official action of the Board of County Commissioners. Ms. Rowe has been in contact with county staff and more or less demanding that we send a copy of the recorded order to the Coos Curry Housing Authority, and because they are telling her that they will not accept her as a member without a copy from us. I looked in the statutes and I didn't see any requirement that we send a copy to the Coos Curry Housing Authority. We had done it one time in the past when we appointed Beth Barker Hidalgo. And so I told Mrs. Rowe I felt like her issue, because there was no legal requirement that we do it, that it was her issues with the Coos Curry Housing Authority, that she was duly appointed and they were preventing her from participating. Nevertheless, and I told Ms. Rowe I'd take it under advisement, and my thinking is Curry County, the Board of Commissioners appointed her to the Coos Curry Housing Authority, and if they won't accept our appointed representative, it could have an impact on the county. So if it's just the consensus of the board, I would like to send a copy of Mary Rowe's appointing documents to the Coos Curry Housing Authority. Even though no one from Coos Curry Housing Authority has contacted me, I asked Mrs. Rowe to have them contact me. They haven't. But I think it makes sense as a policy matter for the board, if we are hearing through the grapevine that Coos Curry Housing Authority won't act to take our duly appointed representative to the Coos Curry Housing Authority without a formal communication from us on the appointment, that we do that so we can carry out the board's direction. Even though I personally think Coos Curry Housing Authority is in the wrong, there's no legal authority that we submit it to them. But if that's the case, I'm willing to send a copy of Ms. Rowe's. If it's the board's desire to have their policy carried out, I'm willing to send a copy, even though I couldn't find any legal authority requiring us to do so. Is there a consensus on the board that we should send a copy of this?
Commissioner Boyce?
Absolutely. I just don't understand why it isn't automatic and why there's a resistance, real or perceived, from them.
I don't understand either, but again, I
Is there
couldn't
something
find
we don't know, perhaps, or?
I have no idea, but I'll do it. And so that's really just a communication
Go.
to the board.
I don't have a problem with sending it on.
Okay. I just hate to assume responsibilities that we don't have by statute or rule, but it.
I guess we could charge them for the stamp.
Perhaps so. Send it cash on delivery. The next thing is you all, two of you commissioners, are new here to the county, and you're getting acquainted with the drives that you have access to. I was looking through a drive that I have access to, which is called the COM drive, which I think stands for Commissioner Drive, and sometimes you look and it's called Shared. And one of the documents, a set of files I found in there, was called Title II and Title III, which is grant funding that we get. And my recollection of talking to Louise Kallstrom is that she had difficulty tracking down records and how we did Title II and Title III spending. So I called her in my office and I said, is this information of interest to you? And she said, yes, it is. But she doesn't have, as a county accountant, access to the COM drive, to the Commissioner's drive. Is it okay with the board if I just copy that file and send it to her on the Title II and III things? The interesting part is when you look in there, there's letters signed by the former county accountant, Gary Short. So it was strange to me that Louise didn't have access to that when it's helpful to her, and I'd like to get her access to that if that makes sense to the board as well. That's my second item.
Total sense to me.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
I think that, there have been more issues that we won't go into here on the county accountant not having access to very strategic information, with hard drives being wiped clean, etc.
Sure. And the interesting part about both of these two topics that we just talked about are, in my opinion, if the board had a county administrator position, the county administrator could have handled all of these items without the board being involved. And I've heard that there seems to be very little real need for a county administrator, but I think those are just two examples in the last week on a very low level of things that are being brought to the board that shouldn't be or wouldn't be if we had a county administrator. So I think in addition to some of the larger reasons, there's just so many day-to-day operational decisions, as it were, that a county administrator could make that I would like the board to just keep an open mind when we go through the materials. And the third item, I've considered, because I think if you saw in this memo, about, near the budget period of last year, I think it was June or so, when our former director of administration went to Josephine County, I assumed the duties of supervising the 2 office staff in that office, one of which is no longer here. I received, per our policies, what's called the working out of class designation of a 10% bump. That's basically, if you got a 40-hour week, that's like 4 hours a week. And since we're down to 1 person, in my memo I mentioned that it could go to 2 hours a week, or cut the 10% bump in half, which to me makes sense if you do the math. But for me, one of the biggest difficulties I've had in trying to supervise the Bach office staff, and even my staff a little bit to a lesser degree, but very slightly, is my physical location in that room that I'm in, where I can't even see on a day-to-day basis what the staff that I'm supposed to be supervising are doing. And one idea I had would be to move me physically possibly to the room that Summer is in now, and then move Summer out to the front desk, or I could move to another room. What I've heard on the downside of that is that the benefit of my location where I am now is that it allows for confidentiality, which is key to the lawyer functions. And again, I think my county council functions are more important than I'm sorry to say it like that, but they have a different level and a different importance to my work as administrative supervisor of one single FTE in the Bach admin. So I think the location for the legal work makes a lot of sense. It doesn't make sense for what's now about 5% of my job, and so I would just like the board consensus. I had thought moving would make sense. Does it make sense to the board, or should I remain where I am? Does the board have any hard feelings about that one way or the other, just kind of trying to get an idea?
If I make a quick comment, because I discussed this with county council, this very subject, and passed on my opinion, I think that's perhaps why this footnote is in the memo, that to me it did not make any sense for most of the reasons that he just addressed, certainly for the confidentiality, the paper-thin walls, and the fact that it's not a permanent issue or not permanent situation. I also addressed the difference, in the 10% versus something different because of the scenario now. But I think it would be an inappropriate reaction to something that I don't believe is going to be permanent and clearly needs improvement. That's just that was my opinion that I voiced to county council.
That's helpful. I like the idea of the hopefully temporary nature of my working out of class situation. So that would make me be able to really say, okay, let's just
and I think,
leave it for
although
now.
it's gone on longer than some may have hoped, by myself included, it was always, I think, temporary. It was never identified as permanent.
Well, then, I tell you what,
But
I'll
that's
just stay
my
put.
opinion only.
This is just communication for the board, then I'll just stay put. But I'd like to hear from the board if you have any thoughts on it
Commissioner
one way or
Boyce?
the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did you say 5% of your BLC administrative duties are 90? Yeah, did I hear that correct?
Currently, I'm receiving, and since last June or so, I was receiving a 10% working out of class for supervising 2 FTE in the Bach office. And since December, we've been down to 1. And if 10% is for 2, for me, 5% makes sense for 1. And again, 10% would be roughly 4 hours of time a week, which I think I've been putting in a little more maybe. And then for one person, maybe 2 hours a week. So I think the chair, for those reasons, for 2 hours a week plus a temporary nature, just communication, it was just an idea I had. It probably doesn't make sense to go through all the trouble of relocating, but I would also be more accessible to the board members on an individual basis, but you'd lose, I think, what the chair says, and I agree, is confidentiality. So.
Real quick, Mr. Chair, it seems a little strange for me to have you in that that room and not closer. Even if 100% of your time was just for legal counsel. Thin walls, I would think that's something we could overcome. Whether you're in Miss Madison's room or the one right adjacent as you walk in the hall on the left. My feeling is the closer we can have you and accessible to all the commissioners and your staff, I think that makes logical sense to me, but that's just my view.
Let's leave it for another day. We'll come back to it, but I just wanted to let you know kind of what some of the thoughts were, and maybe at the next board meeting under commissioner comments or reports we can do that. I do know that in the past the county council had been in that area of the building, but was moved for, you know, again, the confidentiality reasons, I think. And that to me is a #1 job of the lawyer. So I think for those reasons it makes sense how it is. I'm just talking options. And again, I don't want to take too much of this time. I'll bring it up in board comments, but it was something going on. So
if the board chooses, I'll help you move everything except the books.
I don't think it'll fit.
Yeah.
And not
okay.
only that, we get some exercise if we have to go down there, so.
There is an advantage to getting up out of your chair and walking around. I will say that, stretching your legs, and I try to do that when I can.
And I think the confidentiality issue is big, so.
Well, I like the temporary element as well, so those are all good for me. Pardon to the audience for that diversion. I think, sorry, Mr. Chair, for that, but if we could, I'd like to just start going through the memo, and if I could go through the board, you can have questions as they come up. You can interrupt me, or you can save your questions to the end, however you like. Really not a ton of structure to this presentation. What you have in front of you, and again, what some members of the audience have, is a memo, and I suppose if there's other members of the audience who want a copy of this, I can send an email to my staff and have her print. Is there a show of hands who'd like a copy of this? I've got 1, 2, 3. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and email her and ask her to print up, well, I'll just say another 5 copies, and then she'll, when you show your hands when she comes in, that'll be fine.
Unless, this, again, a comment on the 2 approaches you mentioned as far as going through your memo. My preference for continuity in going through something like this is if you could just go through it, and then we have notes that we come back with, because the theory's good maybe, but once we start interrupting you, you never stay, I'll speak for myself, you can't stay on track. You're back and forth, and I think your memo could be better covered if you go through, if we haven't already made notes, which I certainly have,
Sure.
to come back and ask.
All right, well, we'll do it one time from the top.
On that.
We'll do it one time from the top and see how
We're
we
going to
do.
read all 11 pages.
No, sir, I will summarize the 11 pages, and I'll tell you how the memo, how I tried to organize the memo for the board and for the public. The idea here was, what are some of the county commissioners' options on a county administrator position? And so what the board tries to do first, we have our tech coming in. Okay, he's given us 2 thumbs up. I'll continue. So what the memo tries to do first is answer one of the questions, because if I understand correctly, I wasn't around, but the county itself, in some kind of a charter consideration of whether we're going to be a home rule charter county, apparently the draft charter had a county administrator position in it, or at least it was mentioned or something. I don't know if that was a component, but out of that, what I understood, and again, this is just kind of information floating out there. I can't tap a particular source, but there was some sentiment or thought that a county had to have a charter, therefore, to have a county administrator position. So I start off with what are the general powers of a county, and that's on page 2, talks about what are the general powers of a county, and they can do, and 203, 010, and the 4th one, to do all other necessary acts in relation to the property and concerns of the county. So that is, makes me think of when I was back in law school when we studied the Constitution. There's the necessary and proper clause. And so those are typically called enabling legislation. And so what the state legislature, through the general law county statutes, has done is given the Board of County Commissioners broad powers. And then the next broad delegation of powers is 203035, where it says powers of governing body or electors over matters of county concern. And for this purpose of this, I'm not talking about the powers of electors, but they're shared under this with the board. But what it says is the governing body may, by ordinance, exercise authority within the county over matters of county concern to the fullest extent allowed by the constitutional laws of the United States and of this state, as fully as if each particular power comprised in that general authority were specifically listed in these statutes. So again, very broad delegation of powers to the Board of Commissioners. And it says even if they're not specifically listed, you have them, usually unless excluded. And then the powers granted are addition to any other grants of powers and are not construed to limit or qualify your powers. So I tried to answer as clearly as I could with statutory authority that the board does not need a charter to have a county administrator. And then just in case that was ever a question, I think some of my conversations with some of the individual board members was that some of you already knew that, but again, this is a public meeting and we're trying to, just inform the board as well as the public. So what I have also found, I've seen a city charter and I've looked at some county charters, and typically when a county charter, if we were comparing it to the federal, the charter would be more like the Constitution, and then the ordinances are like laws. And so most charters also have similar enabling language to say, we by this charter are giving ourselves all the powers that we can do. So this type of enabling language is typically found in charters as well. But it says the governing body. So then it gets to, who is a governing body? And this is one where each individual commissioner by themselves is not a governing body. What it talks about here, 203.111 says the county court, but if you go further in the ORS 203s, it says if a county has adopted a board of commissioners, and we have, then it says the board of commissioners, anything we said about the county court applies to board of commissioners. And the key for me under 203.240, and this is one that I think counties have difficulty with, and this is where I think county administrators can come in handy. And it's essentially a majority of the board is required to transact county business. And I think county business is a pretty broad idea and concept. And so a majority of the board is required to transact a very broad number of items. And while we're talking about this, I am going to go a little bit on the side. Currently, again, the Board of Commissioners has power to do all of the concerns of the county. And unless delegated, you all decide everything. And so what you have done, have delegated a number of things out to your department heads. For instance, we have delegation to the roadmaster, we have delegation to the finance director on contracting and things like that. But a lot of times, I think we've created these, let's call them liaison positions, but I have yet to find any real structure on what a liaison commissioner's individual delegated authority is. And it seems like in the past, and we may have an unofficial policy where a delegated liaison authority seems to have some feeling that they can direct the departments they liaise, but that's not necessarily the case. And what we've seen in the past, if a liaison commissioner tries to perhaps discipline a department head under their liaison powers, we actually have orders and rules that talk about, the whole board has to be involved in those kind of things. So it would benefit us, and I hate to do this, Mr. Chair, but I do want to skip a little bit, and it's on page 6. It's on page 6, and it talks about board management delegation. And this is from Clatsop County. And what it talks about, if you look at board management delegation policy number 2, unity of control, and it says, only officially passed motions of the board are binding on the county manager. So they're a county with a county manager, but what they've done here is to say that, and to me this is more or less a restatement of the law, but I think what happened in this county is they just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that it would take, an official motion of the entire board to direct any county manager in their business. And again, delegation to the county manager. The board will instruct the county manager through written policies that prescribe organizational ends to be achieved, organizational situations and actions to avoid, and allow the county manager to reasonably interpret that. So what it tries to describe there is that the board sets policy, and that the county manager administrator position carries out those policies and all of the other ordinances. So that to me, and then if it were, I think something else that would be beneficial, because what I've seen where I came from was that it's a situation that's very difficult to avoid, where an individual commissioner, and where I came from, it was we had 8 individually elected city council members, and each of them had things they wanted to do and questions they had and they needed answers to before they would go to a board meeting and talk about things. And so what our our city manager did in Medford was made a rule that, so this one talks about what the board can do to direct the county manager, but then I think you need a corresponding rule of, and by the way, staff cannot commit any more time, and they made a 1-hour rule that if a elected official comes to an individual department head, that the department head can work directly with that elected official on a project that didn't take longer than an hour. But if it was going to go more than that, so you need one. This one has, we're going from the commissioners down to the administrator, but it's very difficult for a county employee, if a commissioner or an elected official, even at the city, again, I'm not saying anything that's particular to this organization. This is, I think these rules are in place at other organizations because these are shared, administrative and managerial concerns. But what I've seen is that you also need then a rule where an individual employee or department head can't commit a bunch of, their limited county resources to the direction of one commissioner. That would be another benefit. And it's not contained in these, it's just experience that I've had. So going back to page 2, we got to the majority of the board. We're getting to page 3, and these questions then are, the statutes grant broad powers to the county and to the Board of Commissioners. Then what powers can then the board delegate to the administrator? And what we've seen is those delegations are very broad, but in the examples that I found, and I think it's based on the statutes that we have here, they typically limit the commissioners, the administrator delegation, because I don't even know if the commissioners would have these authorities either, and what I say, and I'll use this term loosely, I put it in quotes, but I don't think a Board of Commissioners could fire another elected official. I don't think I've seen that happen. The only thing in the statutes I found was this 308.055, where the board could appoint another public official. In this case, it's the assessor, but it doesn't say that anything else would happen to the existing assessor. It just says the board can appoint a special assessor. That's the only, I didn't find anything like that. And then there's other, the board has powers to fix compensation of its own members and all officers, deputies, and employees, and can also fix the number of employees and deputies and other officers. And those are the 2 there. And with respect to the sheriff's office, the sheriff gets treated a little differently. The sheriff's deputies shall be appointed by the sheriff in writing and continue during the pleasure of the sheriff. So in other words, that would be difficult. I think you would probably need a charter changing out of general law to overcome some of these abilities that the sheriff has if the board was interested in delegating as much power as possible to a county administrator. But absent that, I think the sheriff is cut out in the statutes, aside from all the other elected officials, with respect to organizing his office and hiring his people. What I've seen, and if you recall, the board was asking for an option to do a hiring freeze. We did do a hiring freeze in the past, and that hiring freeze was authorized, and it recited to the statute ORS 204-601, which I only mention here, that would that it says the board will fix the number of employees and deputies. So under the ability of a board to fix the number of employees, we then adopted a hiring freeze in the past, and that'll be coming to the board next meeting. So then again, now let's go into, if we could, we're on page 4, and we talk about how then is a county administrator position created. It can be created by a charter. It can be created by a code, ordinance. I say or order. I think technically it should be created by an ordinance, but an order could then fine-tune and provide additional details to the position, and also give direction and those kind of things. So when I say created by, I think I use created in a broader sense than simply the establishment. I mean, just then how do you establish it, and then there's always going to be times where you're going to want to fine-tune it down the road, and you can use orders to do that, I think. So I talk about who some of the charters. So we go through a charter first, a sample charter, and Clatsop County has in their charter what a county manager does, and these are very typical, and it says chosen by the board without regard to political affiliation. That's very common, that it's not a political, and that I think means a party affiliation, solely with reference to executive and administrative qualifications. So they're looking, usually when you hire one of these people, you look to their executive and administrative qualifications, and then it says they would be the head of the administrative branch, and I suppose some people might call that the fourth branch of government. But again, administrative branch, because in the statutes it describes the sheriff as the sheriff, not the sheriff, the sheriff as the chief executive officer. But I think that means in the old rubric of legislator makes the laws, executive enforces the laws, and judicial interprets the laws. I think they mean the sheriff is the top law enforcement officer in the county, unless that's a district attorney. I'm not sure. Okay, in murder cases it is. Very good. So then, so again, the administration, and then if you look back, they carry out the policies established by the board, and that sets out again, the board should be involved in policies, and then they hire this person to carry out their policies. Just as in our county, you've hired each of us. We've got the the county accountant, excuse me, there, myself, legal counsel. You've hired us to carry out, your legal policies or your financial policies, as the case may be, the road department, the road policies, the planning and development director, the community development policies that you all have adopted. And then the next one, very typical, responsible for employment and termination, and this says of all county employees for all departments of the county. So this is the Clatsop County Charter, but then the Clatsop County Board of Commissioners, I say, supplements the above general grant of authority with specific authority in its code. So they have a charter, then they have a code, and this code here involved personnel action. So instead of having a code section on the county administrator, they have a code section on personnel, and they talk about what the county administrator does here, and they say, there's a section in D, there's a little qualifier that says a county administrator can do these, and the Board of Commissioners has a right at any time to amend or modify or repeal it so long as consistent with the county charter. So their charter is their governing document. Going on to page 5, they talk about what are the different meanings, the terms below, because if you saw in their charter, it says the county manager or county administrator has power over all employees of the county and all departments, but then in this code, they carve out and they say an employee means but does not include, and then they have an exclusion list of who are not county employees under the charter, and it says elective officers, and again, they mention, and then they say the county manager, county council, department heads, members of appointed county boards. Those are volunteers typically. So, and then contractors, of course, independent contractors by law usually are not employees. So they start broad and then they carve out. When I looked at this list, I thought, well, who's left after all these exceptions? So in my experience, typically, and what they were doing with this exclusion, these are not the people to who the county administrator doesn't have authority over. You have to read further. These are people to who their personnel policy part of their statute doesn't apply. So the county manager still has authority over department heads. That's found in department heads, and it says they can be covered by personnel procedures adopted by the manager. So what they've done here is they've delegated the county manager to adopt other procedures in this code. Talks about disciplinary action have been imposed on employee by the county manager or county manager's designee. Typically what happens is the county manager then, through their regulations, will say, I'll make these employment decisions, but department heads, you make these, and if you make a decision, I can have an appeal or some type of a level, because there's typically with employment actions, there's a due process element, and you need to have a decision maker and then a reviewer, and so sometimes the department head's a decision maker and the county manager's a reviewer. Here, I think we have the board do some of that. And then you've got administration. County manager's power under charter include, but not limited to, adopt written personnel policies. Here we do those, the board does them. Prepare a classification plan. I think the board does those. Again, discipline employees as he or she determines necessary. Provide recruitment, delegate powers to a department head or other subordinate. Again, these are pretty common. So, and then the idea would be the department head doesn't have to, or the county manager, administrator doesn't have to supervise every employee in the county. They just have to hold the department heads accountable for their employees. So again, the Clatsop County is on page 6, and then we covered the board management delegation. I think that's a very helpful tool. It's a helpful reminder, in my opinion, of what the status of the law is. And then if the board was interested, I would recommend having another thing that says employees, and then probably the manager would do this, but employees shall not dedicate more than X amount of their time to any request by an individual elected official, just so that the employees know, because it's very difficult for an employee to, tell an elected official, you need to go get a vote of the board. I think it's the law, but it's hard, and that's also hard for administration because the board only meets every 2 weeks, and so I think having some rules involved there makes sense. Jackson County is another place, another county that has a charter, but they just say that the Board of County Commissioners is responsible to the people of the county for proper administration. So they, in their charter, put all administrative powers in the board, but they say the board can delegate their functions. And in Jackson County they have, and their county, and I looked at what their county administrator does, and I think it's in a statute, but it might be in individual statutes. Typically can appoint numerous county officers, determine rightfulness of claims to abandoned county property. So there's a lot of things that happen on a day-to-day basis. Authorize modifications to the county logo. I thought that was a little bit specific and kind of obscure, but maybe they had an issue where they needed to modify their logo. And we just talked about our logo a little bit ago when we were talking about our website. And then another county, Clackamas County, defines the administrator function in its code. What they've done is, in their code, created a county administrator. This is Clackamas County. This is on page 7 at the bottom. And again, comparing that to Clatsop County, they didn't have a singular code that mentions the county administrator. They just peppered it throughout. So the part of Clatsop County where we were talking about employment powers, yes, they had an employment part of their code. But here they talk about the county administrator and shall act as the head of administration if delegated by district boards, the boards it serves. The relationship between the county and the administrator is set forth in the chapter and an employment agreement. So again, an employment agreement is very typical. And then the county administrator not inconsistent with the chapter. Here they say what the qualifications are on the top of page 8, solely on the basis of executive and administrative qualifications. So this is in the code. The other place I think was in an employment description. And then they talk about a residency requirement. Those are pretty common. Where I came from, the city had a requirement that the city manager be a resident of Medford or at least become one within 6 months of hire. There's been some challenge on those on constitutionality, but I think they've been upheld, and I think they make a lot of sense for policy reasons to have the person who's charged with a lot of authority have to basically kind of lie in the bed they make, as a phrase might be. So then they then delegate out the county administrator, and they say it's a chief administrative officer. All this should start to sound very similar. And then it says they would have supervision and control of all administrative departments, divisions, and here they carve out county council. And I appreciate that because the county council serves an organization, and the organization, as we've seen from the very beginning here, is the 3 of you, and actually it's 2 out of the 3 of you, a majority of the Board of Commissioners. and then I serve all the other elected and appointed officials in their capacity, and they all operate in their statutory realms, or as you've designated and created them. When they're operating outside of their realms, I don't really feel I have a legal duty to them. But if they're operating within their realms, I give them legal advice and service. The county administrator exercises no authority over actions of elected county officials. So again, pretty common that when you have a county administrator, could they? Perhaps. I think it's more likely that they could perhaps be involved in the administration of employees within county officials, but it's possible that perhaps a county administrator could make rules about what the other elected officials do to the extent the Board of Commissioners could. And I haven't been asked to explore that question. These are just kind of extemporaneous thoughts here we're having. And then the Board of County Commissioners delegates broad authority to perform functions responsible to the board for the manner of his or her administration, and the board reserves legislative, judicial, and quasi-judicial authority unless expressly delegated. So quasi-judicial is typically in a land use situation. Legislative typically, well, is the most common example is making ordinances and things like that. And then judicial, every now and then you hear hearings. Some judicial functions and quasi-judicial functions, boards have delegated to managers or even an independent hearings officer. Boy, I'm having a hard time talking today. Let me see here, what else? The Board of County Commissioners delegates to county administrator contract signing. So that's very typical. And this says contract signing for any contract previously approved by the Board of Commissioners. That's a very broad delegation. What I've seen is some type of a split. Typically, we currently have contracts up to $10,000 can be approved by Louise Kallstrom, our county accountant. But over that, it goes to the board unless they're on a state-approved list out of the road fund. But usually it's 50, and the state statutes have made it 150. Pretty rare example. Typically, it's closer to 50 for contract authority, but some places have it up to 150. And then also with contracting authority, some entities have carved out exceptions. They don't want their county administrator to do intergovernmental agreements. Some allow the county administrator to do intergovernmental agreements because those are agreements between, two governing bodies. Sometimes it's seen as a matter for the board. Some boards reserve that to themselves. That's a policy choice. They can be delegated. That authority can be delegated. And then they say perform day-to-day functions. We're just going down this list. Provide proper administration of ordinance resolutions, all contracts and franchises, enforcement of all policies and rules. So another area where we're struggling, and it's probably been since I've been here and probably since before, is code enforcement. At first, because we actually have a county ordinances on enforcing our county codes and provisions of them. And currently what we have is if someone wants to enforce a provision of a county code, they have to come to the board and then the board has to order it. But the board also designated to a county code officer to do that. And at last budget cycle, we created that position and the sheriff was to be in charge of it. The sheriff had difficulty recruiting and the sheriff recently said he's not going to recruit that. So even though we kind of labored on it and made efforts in that direction, we still don't have a county code enforcement officer. And that's typically because what we have is we have codes in a lot of different departments. We have codes in the development department. We have codes outside of the development department. And what happens is who enforces which codes. It's typical that a code enforcement officer, if they're not under one of those departments, and we don't have them under either department now, law enforcement or development, that they'd fall under the powers of a county administrator. And even if not, the county administrator would direct whichever department was doing that. So we're lacking in that area. So again, I've heard that we don't need one of these type of people, but that's been wanting since I've been here and possibly before. So that would be one area where you could get a lot of improvement by having a county administrator. Here you'll see typical, it serves as a budget officer. I've seen where where the county administrator is the budget officer, but the reality is I think they work hand in hand with the county accountant or the county financial director, the city financial officer. So even though they are the budget officer, the reason is I think the budget is kind of a policy document, and so the board sets a policy, the county manager carries out the policy, and then they work with the accountant and the other department heads to figure out how to budget for that policy choices that the board's made. But it's very common to have them as that. And prepare an annual report on finances. We have those, I think, are statutory requirements of our county accountant and our county treasurer. So those are filled by other functions right now. Could those be done by the county administrator, perhaps? Select appoint all staff employees for unclassified status. I'm on to page 9 now. Manage, administer service districts, coordinate work and facilities of all departments, agencies, elected and appointed. So in other words, coordinate the efforts between departments. We do have another reason, well, I think part of the shortfall in our code enforcement is just an example, and I hate to come back to that, but it's just an example for purpose of discussion. The difficulty coordinating between departments to, if the complaint comes into the development department sends it to the sheriff to do code enforcement, and then the sheriff doesn't have a code enforcement officer. So a county administrator could direct the departments together. And that, to me, if you're going to have one, that's a key that would help. And then formulate and present to the board plans for implementation for goals adopted by the board. And again, that's pretty typical. And this kind of establishes, again, it's not required in the statutes, but most counties that have these have reserved to the boards their policy-making functions and then direct the management and the administration to carry out those policies. And then what else? Administer risk management program. Here, county council does that. And usually, again, any of these can be delegated out to another department. Direct use, operation, maintenance, custody, and control of all county property, building, works, and improvements. So you have one centralized area for this. We're having some issues with this on our IT, some issue, because we have different departments using our IT department, using our IT services, website, email, internet, that's one area, but then building maintenance, those kind of things could all be centralized or at least coordinated a little better. We do this loosely, and I say loosely because it's almost only by consensus among the management, because we have management group meetings once a month, but unless we have consensus, there's really no authority of one department head to direct another department head to do anything. So it's a little bit difficult. So that's what a county manager can do. And again, before, what we saw is absent a county manager, it takes board direction, and that's once every 2 weeks, 2 out of 3 voting. You have one kind of I'll just say it's inefficient in my opinion, and it just in time alone, and then the preparation of materials for meetings and things like that. So a lot of things could happen slightly more quickly, I think more quickly, especially if the board made the policies clear and gave the manager direction. Then it wouldn't have to come to the board as much. Maybe your board meetings would be shorter, possible?
Jeez, that was my thought.
Ah, okay, good. So, and then conduct other activities as may be required by the board. And as we saw from another county, they require a written order or some written thing from the board. And that's again, I think, a really good way to do it. And again, unless excused, attend regular meetings. Very common a function. They're required to attend all meetings of the board. What else? The county administrator that's retained by the board would delegate authority. So if you're going to do a county administrator, it has to be someone that you have real good confidence in and their ability to carry things out, and also just that you think they can work with the majority of the board and the department heads, because that you're basically entrusting to them the ability to do it, but also then the ability to delegate out to others to sub-delegate. And then the term, very common, they're at will, indefinite term, and then it says consistent with any employment agreement. And then, so this code grants powers. This is the Clackamas Code compared to the Clatsop Code, and it makes them responsible for all kinds of county functions. And then we get into job descriptions, and again, these will sound similar to what's included in codes and charters, number 10. And again, I'm sorry, some of this is repetitive, but it's just examples, and even though this is repetitive, this is only a small slice of what's out there with the 38 different counties, and maybe the 20 of them, more or less, that have county administrators. I think I only sampled 3 or 4. So employment qualifications, again, knowledge of county government organization, authority and function, relationships with other governmental jurisdictions, thorough knowledge of principal practice, public administration, thorough knowledge of principal practice, budgeting, financing, reporting, and personnel management. You know, that's fairly standard across the board. These abilities, again, it's a fairly high-level management function, ability to analyze problems, prepare clear, concise reports, ability to supervise work of assigned personnel, ability to establish and maintain effective working relationships with the Board of Commissioners, department heads, elected officials, employees, et cetera. And then education, experience, and training. I think they say desired, but this just says bachelor's degree in business administration or related field, preferably supplemented by a master's degree in business or public administration or related field. And then it says, or any equivalent combination of experience and training. So while, and this is typical of probably any position that has any kind of job description, you set out what you'd like, but if you find the right candidate, any equivalent combination of experience and training allows you to, you know, overlook a lack of certain degrees and those kind of things. So it's desired, but it gives the board the flexibility to pick the right person who they like. So then a list of the powers and duties, again, administrative work, planning, coordinating, working closely with, you know, the departments, individual elected officials, supervise central services, personnel and accounting, annual budget preparation, again, very common, oversee labor negotiations, and that can be delegated out, administer various aspects of insurance programs, risk management, develop, implement county management training, skills, establish the goals for the individual managers, contribute to the Board of Commissioners agenda for meetings. Now, my notes here say, I wrote the word week, but where I came from, the statute, I'm sorry, I've heard other people say that, and I've said it probably 5 times already, but we actually had a code that said that the city administrator was responsible for the preparation of the agenda. This just says contributes to board agenda meetings and agendas as needed. I think making one person responsible for the preparation, and even sometimes what's included on or not on the agenda. Here, we don't have, and I know this is something that it's separate but related, but we don't have as long as someone, as we had the chair talk about at the beginning of this meeting, per our rules, as long as someone submits their items, they quote unquote get to be on an agenda. When you have a person in charge of formulating the agenda, they can actually, no matter when it's submitted, either include it or not, you know, depending on whether it's ready for notice and publication, as the other concerns are for agenda prep. So I think if the board was to consider a county administrator position, they would have more agenda preparation and decision-making authority. Now, that being said, that other entity also had, they had a time limit on their board meetings. They would adjourn by a certain time, and they needed a motion by the board to suspend that rule and go beyond that. So notwithstanding the preparation of agenda, if a meeting hit the hour, they would have to adjourn or have a motion to exceed. So besides just having a person in charge, the board itself has authority to do things that could help its meetings. And I know since the chair, since I've been here, the chair has added, or maybe the board did, excuse me, Mr. Chair, but I think the board added a minute estimated time on some of the agenda items that are submitted, and I think that's to give us an idea of how long a meeting will last. And I think it's only to inform the decision making. I think it's an idea the board might have of how can we limit the length of our meetings. But I think to get information by gathering how long have they been and what's the estimated time on these things. So, but again, I think the most efficient way is to have one person responsible, give them clear direction, and then I think you'll have a lot more streamlined meetings if that's one of the concerns of the board. So an administrator could help in that area. Maybe not necessary, but clearer guidelines then certainly. Coordinate special projects, sure. Serve as management analyst, sure. Identify perceived problems, research the problems and propose solutions directly with department heads or identified by the Board of Commissioners. And then there's always a catch-all, carry out other assignments as directed by board and perform related duties. And then also there are employment agreements, and again, I know as we pointed out at the beginning of this meeting, this was a late submittal. I didn't meet the deadline, and it went into supplemental packet like we usually do, and the board considered whether to do this at the beginning of the meeting. But I did receive an employment agreement from the Jefferson County county manager, but I didn't include that in the packet, and I have not actually even read it, so I'm not prepared to speak on it. If the board wants to see a sample of an employment agreement, I can provide that to them.
Actually, I've got copies for everybody on that.
Oh, thanks. And Mr. Chair and Commissioners, that's really all I had. That was the end of my presentation, I believe. I think the board has broad authority to retain and create the position of a county manager. I've identified in this memo, at least by this memo and just through my observation and my time being here, some of the areas where I think the board could benefit from a county manager. But it's really a policy choice of what the board wants. So that's really all I had, unless there's questions.
Open it to
Well, I don't really have
Commissioner
questions
Gold or
on
comments, and then after that to Commissioner Boyce, and then I'll...
Okay, I have done a lot of research into this area, just being here 3 or 4 weeks, just observing what's going on and having people come into my office, et cetera. It becomes very, very clear to me that we need a manager to take care of a lot of these issues. Also, let me just remind people that there was a Curry County Citizens Committee, and the #1 recommendation, and I'm going to read this and I'll read it quickly. The committee recommends that the commissioners immediately initiate the process of transitioning the county form of government to a commissioner/administrator form. This would involve the employment of a full-time professional chief administrative officer to manage the day-to-day affairs of the county and allow part-time or volunteer commissioners to focus on policy making and long-term strategies. The committee felt that the greater efficiencies and cost savings could be obtained with a full-time professional managing internally. Commissioners would have more time to devote to strategy and advocate for changes we need at the state and federal levels in order to make us financially viable and stable for the long term, some of which are contained in this report. As a long-term strategy, the committee also recommends that the commissioners analyze the advantages and disadvantages of creating a charter form of governance. Okay, that hasn't happened. Individuals that I've talked to are very concerned that they don't want a charter, and I've told them very specifically that we do have the ability to get a county manager without a charter, and legal counsel here has said it specifically. So I've done a little research, and there is a county, Jefferson County, that has 22,000 citizens in the county, which is pretty much what we have. And I talked to the county manager as well as the chair of the commissioners, and I asked a lot of questions about how it was set up and so forth. And let me just give you some information that I found out. All of the commissioners are part-time and receive $32,500 per year with PERS and health care benefits. The main job of the commissioners is to set policy. HR issues, disciplinary actions, and bargaining are taken care of by the county administrators. The administrator is just there to help the elected officials' departments with discipline, administrative, and union problems. Jefferson County has 140 employees. Jefferson County outsources janitorial and mental health services. I'll give you a copy of this. The commissioners meet 3 times per month. All elected officials get PERS and health care benefits with the possible exception of the treasurer. If the treasurer is not the finance director, then they receive 200 hours per year and do not receive PERS or health care coverage. The treasurer, I had a misspelling here, also receives an hourly wage of a little over $30 per hour. Jeff Rasmussen, the county administrator, has been there for 9 years. Jeff Rasmussen indicated that all of the commissioners are very happy with this setup, and the chair indicated that he was very happy with the setup. He's been there quite a while, the chair has. The county administrator's salary ranges from $84,148 to $116,023 per year. And I've got the contact information for all of these folks if you have other questions.
Do they outsource legal counsel, by the way?
No, they do not.
Okay.
But they're considering it, I hope.
Yeah.
I think everybody,
No,
everybody should.
I did ask that question. And I also have a job description for the manager.
Good job.
No, I worked on this because
Good job.
everybody I've talked to in the public is very concerned that we do not have a manager. They're concerned that things are not efficiently run. And I have not come across one person that does not want a county manager. I don't know whether you want one
Thank
of
you
these or
again.
not.
I think if you give one, since Summer's ill today, but I can make sure she gets a copy. She should have a copy for the record for any of these items.
Okay, I didn't get a copy of this, but it's an employment agreement. And if you want a copy, I can get you
Sure,
one.
please.
But- Okay.
And then if we get that into the record also.
I've got the employment agreement here. Commissioner Gold, is it possible, you were referring to the Curry County Citizens group as well? What document is that where, and what's that called?
This is the document that
something
was
on our
put
files?
together, yeah.
Okay,
This is back
It
in
was put
November of
together
2000.
February 1st,
Yeah.
2012.
okay, but that's a county document somewhere in our files.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so November 2012. I just think that should also be
No, it began November 2011, it concluded February of 2012.
February 2012, thanks.
And these were all the
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
recommendations. Do you want this to get
Well,
to Summer?
I think that should be included in just these
Okay.
materials. I mean, it's parting to inform the discussion, so.
There was an additional comment, well, I'll wait till
Okay.
you're through before.
Okay, and then also, I would like to see us move forward with this and have a county manager in place by July 1st. That's my recommendation. So I think I've said enough.
Okay, you sure?
If I have any more questions, I won't
Okay.
feel bad at all about asking.
Boyce?
Do you want to go first, sir?
Nope. Nope, I always allow, the chair should, as a courtesy, allow the other commissioners first.
Is that in the
appreciate that.
rules?
No, I
It's-
think it's just a courtesy of me.
It's
I
I
was
was
just
wondering
kidding.
about
It's just
that.
courtesy, professional
Correct,
courtesy.
and in any set of rules, typically the chair concludes, typically, so.
Well, then I will proceed if that's okay, Mr. Chair. First, Commissioner Gold, thanks for pursuing this and kind of putting us in this. There's kind of a comfort level here that we can discuss this, and a lot of research has been done. I do have three things, Council Huddle. Back to your memorandum, page 3. I slept really good last night when I read this paragraph yesterday. I have found no authority, and you referenced this, by the way, I have found no authority that a Board of Commissioners, and if delegated, a county administrator could fire another elected official. I slept really good last night.
Well, we don't have the authority to do that. The only way we can get rid of them is through recall, and
Well-
that's not our job, so.
Okay, two other things. Back to the sheriff and the code enforcement order. If I understood you right, you said that he's not going to do that. I could comment on that and what his experience has been so far in trying to fill that position.
Sure, I think you can, sure.
Would you like me to just
That's
short?
It's up to you.
Just that he had a very good applicant and spent quite a bit of time with him, and I believe it was from Delaware County. Very experienced, highly qualified, and when the reality of the officer potentially coming to Curry County, he got a pretty insecure feeling and decided to withdraw his application. I think I don't want to speak for the sheriff, but I think he was frustrated and disappointed because he worked a lot on trying to get this person into our county. So that is also one thing that we might be looking at if we decide to go with a county administrator. And I can speak to that more later on. Just the insecurity of coming here and the situation that we're in.
County
Right,
Counsel?
thanks. I think Commissioner Boyce is talking about our financial situation, and again, we have the board has talked about it. This next budget cycle will be very difficult, and also I've heard the word cuts used, but and it's part of the reason why, again, in my memo, I talked about how I had been supervising 2 FTEs since December 1 was gone. I also, for the similar reasons to what the sheriff encountered, I didn't feel comfortable hiring someone full-time when, kind of some of the words of cuts and things like that. I think the board is going to be faced with some really difficult decisions on staffing in particular, and so I had a hard time trying to fill that other position based on, a lot of the staffing or a lot of the ideas of bring someone on and then all of a sudden, we're in a budget crisis and we can't fill positions and things. So those are some of the issues, and so similar issue I ran into and that's my memo mentions we had gone from 2 to 1. I'm only supervising 1 now, and I put out, just as the sheriff did, I put out a memorandum to the county folks saying that I wasn't going to be filling that because of those concerns.
But you're aware the sheriff made a rather significant effort on that?
Oh, definitely.
Okay,
And
thank you.
I
thought you were.
I assisted in that effort. I didn't mean anything otherwise if I said it didn't happen. But yeah, the sheriff, and I'm aware of who the candidate was and their qualifications. I agree with everything you said, and I think the sheriff identified the right candidate. And if I believe it was that candidate who made the decision to withdraw based on the information about, that's very public about our financial situation.
Which was my point.
Sure. Yep.
Thank you. One more thing, Mr. Chair. At the beginning of your memorandum, you mentioned that some of the commissioners, as their liaison, there's a little confusion on the definition there, going to their department heads that might feel that they have authority. I haven't sensed that from the last couple of boards. I certainly haven't sensed it from this board, that as we work with the various departments, elected and otherwise, that we somehow have any authority whatsoever. It's a relationship, it's information gathering. Do I have that correct? I mean,
you are
can
correct
you
in what
that?
the relationship is. I just think the practice is a little less clear than as you stated it, but that's just observational. There's nothing I've really seen.
I'll have to agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think staff extends courtesies to the elected officials in when they deal with them on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah, I just haven't sensed that at all.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
And let me just interject one thing. When there are some HR issues within the departments that we have been assigned to, we really have no power to handle those issues. And to me, it made it abundantly clear to me that we needed an administrator to handle those issues.
And that could be an option. So you and I have the same understanding what our responsibilities are there when we deal and work with department heads and other elected officials. So
yeah, there really is no power in us individually. We
Thank
have
you.
to come together as 3
yes.
or 2.
Okay.
Anything else?
I'm trying to keep it
Well,
zipped.
no, I'm just, not
No,
to
no.
cut you off. That's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Were you?
I'll have other things down the road, I'm sure. Here.
Down this road or today? Or?
Oh yes, today. Depending what you have to say, just questions.
Sure.
I'm not concluded, but I can continue on if you like.
Yeah, we might just interrupt you, Tom.
No, I won't.
I think at least Mr. Chair would.
Pardon me?
Oh,
I'm supposed to call you Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
He
On-
smiled.
Earlier, unless I misunderstood it, County Council, you mentioned, and this is back like 10:14, 10:15 this morning, that you'd heard from several people that there's very little need for a county administrator. Now, was that internally within the county?
Well, I think if you look at Commissioner Boyce's 18-point plan, I think he wrote in there that so that's one person. And that's just one. So there may have been others, but I may have said people because I think he's not the only person I've heard that from.
Well, now my 18-point plan did not reference that. That was just between you and I.
No.
And my observation. No, it's.
I did not commit your 18-point plan to memory. I may be able to pull it up here, but I thought it was on the second page, somewhere in the middle, where you said you were not in favor.
That was an early draft, but
Thank you,
okay,
Commissioner
that
Boyce.
could be accurate what
I
you're
thought,
saying.
does anyone else recall whether that was in Commissioner Boyce's 18-point
I
plan?
don't
or
I
draft?
remember.
just
that it
recalled
was.
what I
I
what
know you
thought
read
heard
the
you
whole
say
thing.
at 11 or 10:15.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
But I'm not saying today
Good.
that I think there's no need. I'm
Okay.
not saying that. I've been back and forth, certainly, and at this moment, I am neutral, and I want to collect every bit of information I can, and I'll have some more questions, and I hope we can have another workshop on this in the near future.
Okay, I'll start just on, and these are my notes from going through the memo, the 11-page memo. On the footnote 1, County Council had mentioned a document from the Association of Oregon Counties which lists the counties having a county administrator, includes Curry County, period. However, Curry County does not have a current county administrator. Now, I had provided County Council back many months ago, and if those other two commissioners don't have this, okay, it's a
I do
real
not.
good summary sheet,
Oh, okay.
okay, that
I wouldn't mind
County
having a
Council
copy of
has.
that.
If you could get the other two commissioners a copy of that.
Well, can you enter that in the record, and we can have it in the record?
Uh,
And we've been entering other documents in the record.
yeah, I
that
can
people
pull
have-
that off
Okay.
here.
Thanks,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
If this is the document, and I'm not sure if there's another document out there, but on this one, and I received the information on how to locate this document from Rocky McVeigh from the Association of O&C Counties. But it's a one-page document that has the county structures, and it goes into general law counties who have judges, who have plus two commissioners part-time, general law, home rule counties, but it goes through on the general law counties. One of the columns is how many members of the governing body there are, and it also has how many have an administrator. Now on this one, it shows that Curry County does not have an administrator. So there might be another document out there that shows that it does then. But
Very
this
likely.
one does not. So I'd be curious
Well,
for the document that does.
I can provide it to
Okay,
you.
thanks.
It's very similar to what are required
Yeah,
county functions.
yeah.
There are probably 5
Okay.
different documents on what's a
Okay,
required
but
county
just,
function.
I'd be
so-
curious what the,
Yeah.
On page 3, in the powers that can be delegated, and I know there was some clarification, as you progressed on page 3, does the Board of Commissioners, and this would be for clearly Curry County, have authority indirectly over staff under elected officials? And if yes, by what authority? And I'm not after an answer necessarily, I'm just but a question that, if you could get back to us, or if it's clarified somewhere in here, direct me to where it is.
Sure, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Could we clarify that question, just so I understand, please?
Well, the question, as was explained on page 3, when it got into some of the powers, what the powers the board has, what can be delegated. And my question is, does the board have authority indirectly over staff under elected officials? If yes, by what authority? Because they certainly have authority to fix the number of employees. They have the authority to, goes on about the specific compensation. So it's what exactly do they have the authority then to basically control, the staff under the elected officials, put the sheriffs aside because, in a general law, you've clearly shown that they don't. In a home rule charter, depends on the charter. They may very well have that authority, but that's
a good point.
That's another beast.
So just, I think it's a pretty detailed topic. I don't think our conversation today could do it justice. What I would prefer is to get some direction from the whole board, because that could entail you know, significant amount of time to get an answer that I was comfortable with. But I will tell you that the starting point of my analysis, Mr. Chair, would go back to the information on page 2 that talked about that the Board of County Commissioners has, you know, all the powers of the entire county in its purview. And then, so that would include, you know, employment decisions. For instance, if you recall, we recently had, in April of 2016, the Board of Commissioners, before April of 2016, approved all hires in the county.
That's what part of the reason for my, for my question.
And so, as it currently sits, Mr. Chair, does the board have those powers? Yes. As it currently sits, the board has adopted a set of policies and procedures that has delegated that out, and essentially you have delegated those. So I don't think in our current structure the board has any particular power over any particular employee other than the department heads or excuse me, as outlined in the personnel policies, which I'm really not prepared to go into any great
But
depth
that
or
could
detail.
change if there were a county manager, you could.
Sure, or it could change if the board changed the personnel policies. So
Right.
it's just,
Sure.
and I think the personnel policies were made to, in part, do some of these administrative streamlining that we've talked about and make things that they're not all board decisions every 2 weeks. So I think, Mr. Chair, the starting point is the county has broad authority to handle many, many functions, including hiring and firing, setting the number and the salaries of employees.
Okay, further on page 3 also, on the third paragraph from the bottom, it says further county boards, but again, this is county boards, have the power to fix compensation of its own members and all officers, which I assume would include elected officials. Yes or no?
I think you do. Now, if you recall from the last budget cycle, if I could just, when you say you presume elected officials, if you remember, once the board sets the salary of an elected official, those salaries can only be changed after, I think there's a statutory salary committee and they present recommendations to a budget committee. So there's a, even though the board has certain powers, there's statutory processes to follow. So there's, you know, there's broad statements and then they just get fine-tuned. So I would like to just keep that in mind as we're talking, if that's okay.
So my question then, following the statutory requirements, and I think their compensation committee meets yearly, I think, I'm not positive, but I think so. Does the board have authority to reduce to part-time irregular? I know we have had a part-time irregular elected officials in the past. One, for example, was the surveyor, before it became a appointed position. But does and I don't know what the history was leading up to that position being part-time or regular. So my question is, does the board, the current board here for Curry County, this general law county, have authority to reduce the part-time or regular, the positions of any elected officials?
Again, I would go back to the broad statement that talks about you have all the powers, but you just mentioned in the budget process. I haven't looked at the budget document, so the statutory grants contained on page 2 of the memo are very broad, give you a lot of powers. So I think, could you, Commissioner Gold has recently, just today, gave the example, I think, of Jefferson County, where they have particular hours and wages and hourly rates for their county treasurer, which is an elected position, I assume, in that county. I didn't think they were a charter county. So,
are they
general,
a charter county?
No, they're
Okay,
general
they're
law.
So again,
That's why I did that.
just as we're talking here, and I reserve the right to give a more
Change your
detailed.
mind.
Yep, exactly. Upon more information.
I understand.
Upon more
But
information.
it was a question based on what I saw in
think with
your
the
memo.
information we have today, Mr. Chair, with the broad powers and with the information provided by Commissioner Gold about Jefferson County, and that would probably be one of the first places I'd look. It sounds like you do have authority, but then there's a process, the budget process, the salary committee, the statutory. So it's. I think my answer is very likely, and there's probably a process for it.
Okay.
So.
And staying on page 3, when you talked again about under general law, the statute specifically granting the sheriff the authority to appoint his or her deputies. But in a home rule charter, that's not, and this is a question, not necessarily at all the case.
So I'm, just for the record, this was a presentation on county administrator. I wasn't going to dive deep into what the board's powers were over any other elected or appointed officials. I touched on it just in the brief idea. What I have seen in the past memo that we're preparing for the next board meeting about suspending hiring and the hiring freeze was that that memo invoked ORS 204.601. The board fixed the number of employees and deputies and other officers of the county. So 204.601 was what was invoked to impose a hiring freeze, and I assume that included the sheriff's department. So
Could I just insert one thing here? When I talked to Mr. Rasmussen over in Jefferson County, he mentioned that the sheriff's department could employ their employees and so forth, but if they had any HR issues that they wanted him to help with, he would help, but not necessarily, he was not in charge of that. So.
And if you recall, and again, do you have the power? Perhaps. I think the devil's in the details. But when I looked through most of the other examples, it seemed like there were certain carve-outs of what they wanted the manager to do with respect to other departments, especially of elected officials. So it's whether something's possible and how to do it are big questions not prepared to get into today entirely, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, while you're looking there, Commissioner Gold, you just mentioned the HR. Was he more of a diplomat or perhaps a mediator if they needed help?
This was the county administrator. He did not go in and actually hire or fire the
So would he work
sheriffs.
with the
He just worked with the departments in helping them with their HR issues, if they had them, disciplinary
But I assume
issues.
they have an HR representative in.
Well, they only have, they're like us, similar, 22,000 people in their county. So they're a small county. So, just as we're sitting here going over some of these questions, I'm having further questions that I'd want to ask them.
Which I appreciate, and I think that's the objective of this meeting. I just would be surprised if they didn't have an HR representative.
HR
and if
director?
he doesn't have authority, Mr. Rasmussen, then maybe he was just trying to aid through the system, help mediate.
Well, this was specifically with the sheriff's department, and I asked him about the elected officials' departments. He says, usually I help them if they have an issue, but generally speaking, they're in charge of their departments, so.
I didn't mean to bog us down, Mr. Chair.
Well,
Thank you.
I don't want to get bogged down either. Again, we're talking about county administrator, but there are also other words sprinkled throughout this document from the other counties that talked about also collective bargaining agreements and those kind of things. So particularly with employees in bargaining units, there's agreements in place and there's entire statutes involved in what any government employer, what's the board or department head can do with respect to a member of any bargaining unit. So there's a lot of processes. So just talking about it today in the context is kind of not really doing the topic justice, but I'm willing, if the board directs, to go down that road at some future time.
I think my last comment, at least at this point, there was reference to the length of meetings and agendas and so forth, and I have touched base over the past week with County Council on a topic that I'm interfacing with, and in part with the Community Development and Director, to do with revising that very subject to addressing the limit of meetings, the length of meetings, to revise the public comment card. What was learned in these revisions, or what I've learned about a week and a half ago, was if you go to the county commissioner page on the agendas, the website, right now, there is a link that shows county protocol. So I clicked on it a week and a half ago. And it has, well, you have to read it. It has a lot of the things to address some of the issues that we've had in recent meetings. It also refers to a ordinance, which of the orders and resolutions and, you know, order of precedence, order of strength. Certainly the ordinance comes on the top of all of those because it is law. You can drop down to a resolution. It's a piece of paper, basically. And in many cases, it may or may not be worth any more than a piece of paper, but ordinance is law. And there's quite an ordinance that's referenced. It went back to 2001. And again, you can get, I don't have the number, I don't have it in front of me, but it's there. We're also, you know, that is being addressed and referenced in this proposed order that I think will bring that to, not ahead, but bring it to in front of us 18 years or 16 years or whatever after some of these documents had already been approved, and then they've been sitting there all the time, and I just noticed it again a week and a half ago. We'll also have in there addressed the length of the meetings, and that they would require, or again in this proposed language, they would require a unanimous vote of the Board of Commissioners to exceed that length of time for the meeting. A lot of it's the same, but we've addressed, you know, in there also the workshop and the Board of Commissioner agenda routing topics, and made the one that comes to mind, the routing slips not to be a part of the full agendas, but just internal worksheets.
Interesting.
But again, it will make the deadline by this afternoon, or it will not be on the next agenda. It will not be a supplemental. So that's the goal, is to have that on the next agenda.
So, no, nothing negative here, but you're saying you're kind of laying down the law so we know up front
I'm putting out
that's
for
what
all of us.
I think
Here's
that's
the
fine.
law that's already been there, that's been under our nose, is we haven't known it, and just cleaning that up and putting it in a current document for everybody.
I
think it will
appreciate
be,
that.
A good document, good policy. And those were my comments. So, do we have any other comments?
Well, I guess my only comment is, where do we go from here?
Oh, I do have, I'll let you finish. I did have one other
Go ahead.
comment, too.
If I could, I mean, so Commissioner Gold, we're in a workshop, and the board doesn't usually make direction. What I think, but you have, you know,
Consensus.
you've certainly expressed your opinion that it's a needed position, you'd like to move forward, and you gave a July 1 date. I think the decision for the board is, you know, how do you want to get to that July 1 date? My hunch, you know, you gave a range of salary for that Jefferson County individual. I don't think we have that we don't have that, you know, position. It would create, there would be a lot, but I think it might be something to talk about in the budget. You'd have to, I think, create the position. We've got the...
And all that has to happen, I would say, at a regular meeting.
Sure, so if the board wanted to actually give direction or anything, but it's, you know, if you wanted to give me direction, or the Human Resources Director, our Personnel Officer, direction to at least come up with, you have samples of what's in here. I think at the next meeting, the board could say, I've studied it, I've thought about it, I've looked around, done some research. We direct the Personnel Officer and legal counsel to come up with one of these positions with a range for us to consider, you know, whether it's during the budget discussions or what have you. So I don't know if you could create it outside the budget discussions, but then you'd have to still do something in the budget to it if you say, what are your next steps? And
Well, and we're coming upon the budget here real quickly, and so if we're
Yes.
going to act upon this, it needs to be done.
probably contemporaneously or simultaneously, the two items together, but you know, that's just, we've got the county accountant and the personnel officer here to tell you what it would take to create a position and budget for it. If you want to, I'd defer to them if you have further questions, but I think that would be a good follow-up at board action next time or something along those lines.
Can we ask that right now?
Yes, you
Okay,
can.
let's do it. Julie, what do you have to say?
Julie Swift, payroll and personnel. Our procedure is usually we create a job description. we have a salary evaluation committee. It would go through that process, and it gets placed in a salary range. With what I've looked at on other counties with county administrators, we don't have a range.
I think that might not,
high.
something's not on. Excuse me.
Anyway, we don't have a range as high as most of the ones that I've seen. So I'm not sure how this will fit in our structure. Do we go out of the structure and create a new range? So that's up to you. But we do have a process for getting the job description. We have our evaluation committee. It's rated by LGPI, and the job description is adopted by the board.
Well, we have to realize that this is Curry County. This isn't Clackamas, or it's not
Right.
Clatsop.
Well, even I was looking at Jefferson County, and the document that I have from the survey that was done in December 2015, that position was being paid at over $113,000.
That's because he was at a higher, he'd been there years and years.
Not 9 years, did you
But I
say?
think you
9
said
years.
the bottom of the range was 80-something.
It was 84.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So-
Yeah, I have the document, the
Mhm.
salary scale there. I don't know whether you guys want that too. Salary scale from Jefferson?
I'd like,
Well, sure, I don't think that,
Okay.
We can put it in here, or if the board's going to
Follow-up.
give direction, right, if the board's
For
going to give
follow-up, I
direction, I think when you're making the decision to create the position, I think all those documents will be part of the
Okay.
process, if that's okay.
And do we necessarily need to do a salary commensurate with all the other counties, or?
No,
Okay,
no. And that's your discretion.
okay.
I mean, our salary ranges are set at what they are, and if you want to go outside of those salary ranges, you can also do that.
Okay.
That kind of takes,
Could we get a copy of the salary ranges here? If you could just email that to me, I'd appreciate that.
yep.
So that would give me a little bit
Are-
better understanding of,
It's in the master payroll order.
Thank you. Is
On
it
the
in the?
Commissioner's Journal.
It's in, so is there a place you can find it? I think maybe off the record, you could just show Commissioner Gold where in our
Sure.
computer system she can find that. Is that okay, Commissioner Gold?
that's just fine.
Okay.
I think it's both, is it both in a spreadsheet and a PDF format on that? I think it is. but-
I believe what's on the Commissioner's Journal is PDF.
Correct, it would be PDF, but you also.
Oh, okay,
have
so
a-
it's under Commissioner's
have a-
Journal? Okay, in that,
And I
okay.
can show you where to find it.
But the cleaner one is in the Excel.
Well, I think the one you're talking about is just a spreadsheet with all the people.
Correct.
I have a whole book with the salary
Correct.
schedules themselves. That's easier to find there.
Okay. Good enough.
Mr.
Commissioner Boyce?
Locally, of course, you can't always compare counties to cities, but all three of our incorporated areas have very strong and well-managed city managers, and that goes back to their councils, and their mayors certainly, but some success, bright spots that we can kind of take pride in. I like what you said, Commissioner Gold, recommending possibly July 1st, because that gets us beyond the budget program, and I think that we need that time to kind of process all this, do more research, and as you said, move toward that, perhaps.
Well, the county administrator would have to be in the budget if we're going to act on it.
And that's a good point. So we might even want to go even 1 month beyond July 1st, or maybe that's doable. My initial feeling is it might take a little more time.
Well, basically, in my estimation, we need to come up with a job description. We need to come up with a salary range. We need to come up with how are we going to advertise to get this out? When is it going to be? When are they going to turn in applications? So.
And related to that, Councilor Huddle, whether it's a charter form of county government or general law, it looks like under Oregon law, the counties, for lack of a better word, essentially have the option of customizing what they need to suit what the board is most happy with. Is that somewhat of a fair, putting together whatever we need? And related to that is the job description, and that is going to, in customizing what is best for Curry County, that's going to be a big job. to define that, in my
Well,
view.
I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. Probably look at, I gave you the job description for Jefferson County. That doesn't mean we have to do the same thing, but
Certainly.
there may be some extra things that we want to add to that. And, of course, county council would be intimately involved with this. I would like to see probably another workshop just on what's our job description. Well,
Thank you. That was my last request.
we first of all need to determine, are we in favor of a county administrator? And that could happen, I would say, at the next meeting. And when do we want to hire this person?
I'd rather, excuse me, I'm sorry. Mr. Chair, you've been waiting patiently, too.
No, I want, the county council, you want to chime in?
Well, I appreciate it, Mr. Chair, and it's an opportunity for me to, I'll call it correct the record. When I said I've heard that people don't think we need a county commissioner, and I used plural
County
and whatnot.
commissioner.
Or
Well,
sorry,
yeah, we've
county-
heard that.
Sorry, thanks.
Now, don't pull your.
He saves them for the end of the meeting, doesn't he?
Sure.
Wow.
If I was drinking water, I might have done a spit take.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what I would like to say is, and this is, and again, I said Commissioner Boyce, I had the opportunity while we're talking here to pull up my files, and Commissioner Boyce, this is your Curry Recovery Court Voice number 4 of 2/1 of 17, and I think it was one distributed. And this was the words that made me think it, and I think you've corrected the record. Here's what it said. It says, the lack of revenue for our county is the problem, not the lack of a county administrative officer. So I probably overread that, Mr. Chair, if that helps inform the discussion today. I assume that meant that we probably didn't need a county. I probably went too far, Commissioner Boyce. So that's where I got that sentiment from when I was talking. So.
Well,
that's
I
all.
appreciate you could take the time to do that. And while we're on that subject, right now I think the BOC offices, after only a month of being here, is running fairly smoothly. That doesn't mean we're getting all the work done, but I give it at least a B grade, maybe a B plus.
I would beg to differ, and
I know
I'd give it.
you are stretched.
Especially for my
definitely.
part, I give it a little bit lesser of a grade than that. But unfortunately, it's a small part of what I see my overall duties, and it's just hard for me to dedicate the type of effort I like to the very fractional level of my involvement there. So, but I appreciate your good words there. I appreciate that. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if we got off track.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
I had mentioned I had one thing that I'd neglected to say from a note that I did have, and it goes, I think, that's the reason I'm pursuing this also, hand in hand with the subject of a county administrator. And all this, we're dealing with the current structure of the county, with the for the administrative position. And I did contact, you mentioned the different cities have good.
In my opinion, yes.
Not putting words in your mouth, but all have city charters with a similar form of charter type government that you would have if you went to with a city administrator or city manager. All 3 of the cities have that. The city of Brookings, the city of Gold Beach, the city of Port Orford. I contacted, or back and forth with email with the city manager of Brookings, Gary Milliman, and I asked him for some resources or suggestions that he had, and it was in his response just to the public notice that he'd seen for this meeting today, because he wasn't privy to the memo at that time. And I did ask him also, but he went into his background, and he wasn't going to be able to be here this morning because of prior commitments, but he went into his experience of about 40 years in that type of position, in various locations. I asked him if he had some suggestions also with what we were looking at there with an outside entity from his experience, to look at the actual county structure that we have. And I say the structure, the organizational structure currently, with the departmental structure. And he did give me two or three sources, I don't remember now, but that I'm going to contact them and see what they have, because I think it would, if that was to be done, this would be a good time to do that in conjunction with the administrator. If somebody that deals in reviewing, and it would be outside and I would say, a non-bias or an independent source. And, and there's no question that this does require funding. If, at another point there seems to be interest, I will interface with the accountant as far as the available funds that might
There should be some
fund-
in the BOC
yeah.
office after,
fund such a, such an analysis. But anyway, so that just for your information, I reached out to him, and he did get back to me with 2 or 3 suggestions that he had for that. Okay.
And he did have a recommendation that was probably in the best interest of the county to pursue a CAO, County Administrative Officer.
right.
Correct.
Yes.
Because I think he CC'd
You may have
all
said
3
that,
of
but if you did, I
commissioners.
missed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Correct.
think he happened to be on that Citizens Committee. Was
Correct.
he on that?
And I guess the last point on the Citizens Committee, because I was a member of that Citizens Committee, and at the end of the Citizens Committee, I questioned the group from Portland State University that had been facilitated the organization of that committee. And I asked, because I was started to read in the paper all these things that they had voted on and recommended, and I said, provide me, because I was there, I said, provide me with a vote of how the members of that committee voted to come up to these conclusions that that you're providing to the, I guess, assume to the press and the general public at large. And they didn't have any vote, documented vote of any of those recommendations. I went then to Curry County. They didn't have any vote of those recommendations. I went back to Portland State University. They said it's the county's fault. I went back to the county. They said it's Portland State University's fault. Then I went back to Portland State University. They said, well, it's the committee's fault. It was their responsibility. So just for the record, no vote of those recommendations exists.
No record, you mean?
No record. No record of the vote, County Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to follow up on a point where you asked my source for the counties who had county administrators and
Oh, yes.
whatnot. I went through my files. I had saved it. It was an Excel spreadsheet, and I tried to find the properties because I didn't create it, and I don't have a recollection in my mind. It says it was created 4/21/2015, and the author is Iceland. So take that for what it's worth as far as the information, the source of it, but I'll find it. I think
Okay.
I got it from the Association of Oregon Counties, but I'll go back
Okay,
and look
thank
at
you.
that. But
Thank you.
that to
What
me,
is your point?
Just trying to give
Just
the
from
chair
source.
information.
Well, yeah,
right,
if there's
give the
another
chair
source,
information
because
he was
and I'll
asking
get a
for.
copy of this. This is a good list.
I
If
was-
there's
Yes,
another
thank you.
one, That's a good list.
So that was just the
Yeah.
point there.
Okay.
Boys. Trying to answer the chair's question as best I could.
Another comment, Commissioner Boyce?
Well, you might appreciate this, but I have good friends that are very much in favor of a county administrator and actually done considerable research. And they point to a lack of unity within the previous boards, and they are hoping that if we did implement this position, that might be a tool to have better unity. And so I was very interested to read their review on that and offer that to everybody here today. Thank you.
Kind of like a steam valve.
Yeah, there you go.
Like a what?
Steam valve on a pressure cooker. You just,
Okay. Okay, do we have
Couldn't
any
have said
other
it better.
comments?
Well, are we going to have a quick adjournment here?
I hope so.
Does that take a
I have
motion?
nothing further, Mr. Chair.
I got to read
Further?
something to you today.
Okay. Is it?
Are we in a hurry?
Is it related to the workshop?
No?
Then.
Why am I
if you could-
confused on that? You said we might be able to bring up other issues. 2.5 minutes?
We might, but
Okay, do
we
we
might
need?
not. And my request would be bring it up at the commissioner meeting during the commissioner
That's fine.
comments. Okay,
We got 15 minutes, though.
okay.
12 minutes.
So with that said, we will adjourn.
No, we need a
I
motion, don't we?
have
don't
one
need
more
a mo-
question.
yeah,
Are we going to
yeah.
get something on the agenda for the next meeting for okaying the county commission, or county administrator position?
Well, that depends. You mentioned county council?
If that's consensus, usually you have a workshop and then it's consensus to bring something back. It sounds like Commissioner Gold would like something on the next item. We can fill out an AGRS and it would be basically a discussion item for the board. And then the board at that point, I think, would vote to give direction more specifically, because if it's what you're talking about, I think it will be a considerable amount of staff resources, so a board vote would make a lot of sense. And then it would be up to the board to give, you know, sideboards on the direction of what you want us to go in.
So it would, but not to, again, put words in your mouth, but it would require an agenda routing slip to put the topic, and it could be under commissioner comments. It could be, you know, that might be a logical place. Or
I'd
it
like
could
to
be-
see it
or
on
it
the
could be under-
regular.
It could
Consent?
be,
No, sorry.
no,
Sorry,
no, not
Mr.
consent.
Chair.
No.
I'd
I got
really
you to
like to
smile.
see it as a
Time out.
regular agenda item.
Okay, just, sorry, we are talking over each other. So what I'm, from staff's point of view, and I know we're coming up on the hour, but what I'm getting is a consensus, at least, that the board would like an AGRS to have a discussion of creation of a county manager for a board, more or less decision to create it, or direction for staff to probably bring back a job description and maybe a salary range to see if you want to create it. But basically, you were like, because I don't think you could want to create the decision at the next meeting, but I think you'd want to direct staff to, right, I think you'd want to direct staff to
Yeah.
put in the work to create it. And that,
For a future meeting, but
Okay.
just strictly at that point, it would just be something for some direction to please
yeah, go do these
following
things.
at a
Sure.
future meeting, but you don't physically, I don't think
All right,
have the.
well, I will put the AGRS out to do
Whoop,
it.
whoop, whoop.
Yep.
Comment,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Commissioner Boyce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because we didn't quite make the perfected public notice on our website, and I thought moments ago we had a consensus we were going to do another workshop. Number three, I don't see us in a big rush on this. I'd like to have that other workshop and get the
Well,
public here.
Well, we
That-
could have a workshop on the information that comes out. My point is, I think we've kicked the can down the road way too much.
You want to get something done, and that's great. I just thought we had a consensus on a workshop. I'm sorry.
I think
County Council?
I think we would do both things. We would keep moving in the direction of creating the position, but we've got a broad look here. What I understand the consensus is, you mentioned another workshop, but at least further discussion of the topic. But what I would like from staff to the board is just consensus to bring it back as a discussion topic on the next meeting, and then at that next meeting would not be creating the position, Commissioner Boyce, but to then bring back the board, whether in a workshop or not, the materials such as, you know, how many steps it would take to create. You heard the personnel officer say, we go to salary committee, you know, we have the county accountant here needs it. But I think probably if we put it on the agenda as staff, I would look for, you know, are you looking to study a job description to see if this is a position you want to have? What are the steps it would take? And then I think you would more fine tune some of the, I would call it the delegation to the position at that next meeting and say, okay, we've seen Clatsop
Now, that's going to
County.
require a decision, which is a
It would be
100% confirmation that's the route we're going.
Well, and it would be a direction to have staff do, you know, the work involved, which I think would be considerable, to create more information, but more detailed information. This was, here's your options. At the next board meeting, you would say, we want you to focus in these areas, bring us back more information. And that, you know, we're into February, that would be sometime in March. We'd probably get you the information in March, maybe April. We're dovetailing into budget. And I think the conversation is the two items go fairly well together. We've heard the dollars involved in this. That seems like it would be a budget issue to create this position.
Yeah, we need to look at it.
So in addition to just the board saying, this is something we'd like to do, I think there's many, many steps involved before we get to the actual, we're creating this and go out and do a procurement. Or, I mean, there's even, that's the other question is, how do you recruit or solicit or procure one of these individuals? Some entities go and they hire an outside employment agent officer.
Right.
These people exist. Like we'll call it a headhunter, right? That's a
Okay.
slang word for it. And that would be another choice for the board. I've seen mixed results with that, to be honest with you, and some
You're right.
some bad
We
results.
dealt with that to a degree, or considered that for locating
accountant.
the county accountant.
Sure. So there's several more steps involved, Commissioner Boyce, but on the next agenda would just be a more, here we're getting consensus to talk about it further. At your next meeting, I think it would be direction to staff on a board level to go bring us back, you know, what we envision it to be with the powers, you know, from here. I think what you're looking at is probably creating it as we create any of our other job descriptions by order, but then there's other elements to it, the salary, the budgeting, those kind of things. And so it would be, we would bring you back more information. Next meeting, I would not anticipate as a final decision to create the position, but just to bring you the information as to what it would look like and what it would, and then what it would take to actually implement it would be how I'm interpreting the next
What
steps.
we're looking at is more specifics in the process.
Correct.
Well, it would give the commissioners 2 weeks to think about more specifics and bring those suggestions to that meeting also. I would hope.
I would hope so too,
I would
Mr.
hope.
Chair. There's a lot of information out there that the individual commissioners can obtain on their own, as Commissioner Gold has done. And then it may take a meeting or two. This is a fairly, you know, I'll call it it's a pretty important topic, I think. So,
Yes, it is.
but you know, not to rush into, but also not to delay if it's something that the board desires. So we'll keep bringing back the board information, and I think it'll basically just get fine-tuned down through the process to where the board's at a point to make a decision.
Mr. Chair, I'm quite content with Council Huddle's explanation.
Is that
Thank you.
consensus then? Okay.
Yes, I have
I'm
Thank you.
fine.
Consensus,
All right.
okay.
Then I have nothing further, Mr. Chair.
We will, it is 11:56, we will adjourn.
I second the motion.
Thank you. We're
It's
adjourned.
okay with me.
Thank you.
And don't forget your lapel mics,
What's
please.
in the
Oh,
process?
thank you.
We had a camera ready to go and you jumped up.